Today I'd like to talk about a game I played recently. What was it called again? Yeah, that's the one. Elderborn is a game I played recently, and I feel is one of the more unknown titles in the Souls-like category. The game offers a fast-paced, less methodical take on the genre, and ends up feeling, in my opinion, quite unique in doing so. I'll be honest, I'm quite biased. I really love this game. Elderborn was an early 2020s title, released to mediocre reviews. There was no fanfare, no big release, there wasn't even any booing, it was more of a collective sigh. Hell, if you go on Metacritic, there are only 8 total reviews for the game, and one of them is a joke review from 2 years before the game's 1.0 release. When you do find some reviews to look at, the game is accused of being generic and boring, and there's a general lack of enthusiasm with the game's design and overall feel. I think that the oversaturated Souls-like market, accompanied by its darker visual style, is partially to blame for this, but we'll talk more about that later. The game describes itself as an FPS hack and slash Souls-like, and is referred to by reviewers and my monkey brain as a cross between Doom and the Souls-like genres. The dash mechanic and lack of a stamina bar encourages you to play fast, killing first and thinking about resources later, similar to Doom's omission of a reload mechanic, allowing for an in-your-face style of play. The standard Souls-like systems are in. Fountains replace the standard bonfires as checkpoints to rest up and spend your souls or level up. When you die in the world, you will have to trek back to the spot you died in to obtain the souls that you dropped. Dying twice in a row will result in you losing all of your unbanked souls, which becomes more devastating the further into the game that you are. The player gains souls from fallen enemies, which are used for leveling, though Elderborn's system is less complex than the standard array of 8 stats in the Dark Souls series, with only 3 to choose from. Strength, which makes your strikes deal more damage, Dexterity, which increases the speed of all your animations, and Vitality, which increases your maximum health. So far, all very standard stuff. So what does this game do differently? If you have played any of the titles in the Souls series, you'll know that they often play it very slow and methodical, especially on your first playthrough, where you don't know how prepared you are or what trials you're going to face. This game, however, aims to break that formula. Elderborn takes consumable items and inventory UI out in favour of a hotkey system, allowing you to select from any of your weapons on the fly, and allows you to do so incredibly quickly. In fact, it's so quick, it allows you to create a sort of combo. First, parrying with a quick weapon, such as the spear, and then switching to a heavy weapon to stagger your enemy further, preventing them from reacting. Another feature that changes the way that you play is the health regain system. Very similar to Bloodborne, where attacking an enemy after you've just received damage will let you heal back some or even all of the damage, encouraging you to play more aggressively. But before we get too into the specifics, let's begin from the beginning. The game has 4 difficulty options, from normal to the aptly named Hard AF. There is no in-game description of what exactly the different settings do, but in my experience they seem to decide how aggressive your enemies are, how much healing you receive from your from your potion, and chiefly, how much damage enemies will deal with their attacks. I wouldn't recommend Hard AF to new players as the enemies can deal questionable amounts of damage. You start the game with a basic sword that has a light and a heavy attack, and allows the player to block. You are taken through a small tutorial area that gives you the chance to fight a few enemies one at a time to get used to the game's pace and mechanics. The game respects your intelligence enough and will explain what things are, leaving you to figure out the rest, including combos, style of play, etc. The tutorial ends with you being shown that there are colour coordinated keys and doors. The keys are hidden around the map, meaning that you'll have to explore to find them, and your progression is directly linked to your exploration, and I guess your colour matching skills. All in all, the system feels just like Doom's coloured keycard system, a system that reminds me of a game I played as a toddler, putting the correct shapes in the correct holes.
A cylinder.
The circle.
I think that goes in
The circle.
the square hole.
I like that the tutorial is short and just explains the basics. It fits the fast-paced style of play and allows you to get stuck into the game right away. After using
100%
of your brain to figure out that the red key goes in the red door, you progress onward to the first chapter of the game. There are two main weapon types in the game, heavy weapons and light weapons. Each of these has two weapon types, and each serves a different purpose. First, we'll go over what you will probably lean towards using the most in your first time playing. Light weapons allow you to attack faster than heavy weapons, have higher movement speed while held, and come in two categories, dual wielding and spears. Dual wield weapons have the fastest attack speed in the game and are fantastic for single target kills, such as the Berserker, and can lead to quick takedowns. The other category is the spear, having better AoE control, doing sweeping attacks, and is accessible slightly earlier in the game. But there is one detail that I haven't mentioned yet. Most importantly, light weapons can parry. Parrying is arguably the most satisfying part of the whole game, allowing you to stop an enemy's attack mid-swing and deal a unique counter hit that deals between 2 and 10 times the normal amount of weapon damage, dependent on the weapon you're using. Not only that, but landing a successful parry staggers the enemy hit, and nearby enemies can also become staggered, allowing you to wipe out whole groups with one well-timed parry. Not only is this a fantastic way of dealing with groups of enemies, but with only 5 levels investment into dexterity, you can send projectiles back at the enemy that threw them. Not to mention, both boss fights require you to parry to make the fights easier. The only time you won't be parrying is if the enemy uses a heavy attack or you're fighting one of the tower mini-bosses, and even then, you'll be skewering all their pals like a shish kebab on the way out to paying them a friendly visit. The second weapon type is heavy. These weapons are generally slower, do more damage per swing, and stagger enemies a lot easier, rendering them unable to move. These weapons require a different style of play from their faster counterparts, but add a versatile element to the game. Their heavy attacks can break through light shields, even their light attacks can knock enemies into a ragdoll state, allowing for several follow-up attacks while they get up.
I've fallen, and I can't get up!
Stun locking enemies to death is a very viable tactic in the game, especially once you reach Chapter 2, where enemies have higher health pools. They're not as apparently broken as the parry mechanic. Heavy weapons, I have found, provide good versatility and are a safer option, especially if you're attempting a Soul Level 0 or Iron Man challenge run. Their ability to render opponents unable to move for prolonged periods, proving invaluable at conserving HP in many areas of the story. Each weapon does a different type of damage, namely slashing, piercing, or blunt, each enemy having potential weaknesses or strengths to each of them. Though, I'll be honest, these don't really have a big impact outside of boss fights. Each enemy can be stun locked into oblivion with the right combo, so damage numbers tend not to matter all that much, even on the highest difficulty settings. Hell, I didn't even notice these weapon aspects until my third run, when I was reading through the codex entries. Oops. Dashing is your core defensive option in Elderborn. The dash is invincible, fast, and has very little end lag. There is no stamina bar, as I mentioned earlier. Are you paying attention? This will be on the test. Having no stamina limit means you can effectively use dash off of cooldown, as long as you don't dash into a horde of enemies and get caught. You have the ability to zip around groups of enemies, caught with their pants down, trying to attack where you were 2 seconds ago. For those of you who didn't have an Xbox or gaming PC back in 2006, the title Dark Messiah of Might and Magic may mean nothing to you. But to those few of us blessed with this game 15 years ago, one mechanic in particular will stand out from that game: the kick. Dark Messiah's gameplay loop didn't just revolve around the kick, but early on in the game, the mechanic could be used to insta-kill enemies by kicking them off of ledges or into arena hazards. The mechanic was so prevalent, the game became known for it. There is a reason I'm giving you this history lesson, and it's not just because I love Dark Messiah, it's because Elderborn has a very similar kick, and oh boy is it known for it.
Wow!
The level design in this game is actually pretty good. The developers knew how you'd play the game when designing the areas, and added a lot of verticality to them. In the first chapter, you climb up rocky stairs, round underground passes, and ascend to broken platforms held together by chains linked into the walls. The areas are designed to give you the opportunity to kick enemies to their deaths and give you escape routes should you need them. Enemies are appropriately placed to continually increase the challenge as the game goes on, with some enemies offering small areas to fight them one-on-one for their first and second encounters, then becoming grouped with allies the further into the chapter you progress. I did see a few reviews complaining about the level design.
Don't get it.
Each area is different enough for you to tell where you are, and has varied levels of challenge as you progress. There are a few oddities with strange spawns and a few annoying gank enemy placements, but the verticality is what makes the level design fit for purpose. And did I mention how satisfying it is to kick enemies to their death? One of my favourite features about the game is its encouragement to complete challenge runs. There are many achievements for this game that require you to beat it with specific challenging options enabled. Firstly, the most obvious run, the Hardcore Iron Man. This run requires you to go from start to end with 0 deaths. That's 3 chapters of the game, 2 boss fights, and a whole swath of enemies, without dying even once. The game takes me, on average, about 2 to 2.5 hours to complete a full run. Ensuring you don't slip up for the whole 2 hours is no small feat, but definitely more manageable than doing this task in a main series Souls game. One small gripe I have with the Iron Man challenge is the inability to turn off tutorials, so when you do die, the unavoidable tutorial pop-ups will only serve to tilt you further as you rush to get back to where you were in your last run. Another challenge will have you beating the entire game at soul level 0. This means no leveling up at all, no special abilities, no air dash, no cheating death, no reflecting projectiles, nothing. It sounds a bit dull on paper, but I found it made for an interesting run, requiring me to master the timing of all enemies, as their time to death was much higher without those crucial strength and dexterity upgrades. The last challenge is the no respawns challenge, similar to the Iron Man challenge, but you cannot rest at a fountain and must kill every enemy in the game. So that means no deaths, no resting, and no enemy left uneviscerated. This is the hardest set of achievements in the game, and is definitely the challenge I struggled with the most during my over 10 playthroughs. My intention with this video is to encourage other people to try Elderborn, and I've tried to remain positive throughout the review, but I want to stay fair and talk about the not so great aspects of the game. So let's address the elephant in the room. The art style this game adopts is very bleak. The game isn't very pretty to look at, and some of the textures are downright ugly. This becomes more noticeable as you progress through the game, with parts of Chapter 2 looking especially bad. Now that I've played the game a few times, I've started to appreciate the bleak atmosphere and gotten used to those god-awful Chapter 2 textures. This isn't really an excuse, but it can make your eyes bleed on your first few runs. The knockback bug is an issue I've encountered a few times, and is a product of a core design issue with the game: airborne acceleration. This sounds complicated, but is in fact hilariously simple. When an enemy in the game hits you with a power attack, they should knock you back a small amount. It's pretty small and barely even noticeable, but it's enough to interrupt your own power attacks, and, in theory, it can knock you off a ledge if you're really close to the edge. This pushback has a very different effect when you're in the air, or on certain ledges and slopes. I'll let the footage explain the rest. On first viewing, this might just seem like a funny addition to the game, but when you're 2 hours into an Iron Man save and you lose your run to such a ridiculous bug, it can be pretty disheartening. There's more than a handful of complaints about the game's bosses, or I guess lack thereof. Plentiful and difficult boss battles are a staple in the Souls-like genre, but there are only 2 bosses in Elderborn. The first boss is a standard watch and parry system, with the boss mixing up his timings to throw you off and becoming bestial in his final phase, leaping at you on all fours, becoming more vulnerable in doing so. The other boss fight is an Ornstein and Smo type double battle. No, not that kind. As you'd expect, there's a big slow guy and a small fast guy. Smo Amzarak does slow, unblockable heavy attacks, while Ornstein can teleport behind you.
Nothing personal, kid.
And does lightning fast combos. The boss fights themselves are less than stellar. In fact, I'd argue that the only design choice I felt had a negative impact on my experience. The first boss, Janus, is serviceable, being a gatekeeper until you learn how to parry properly, and being a bit of a pushover once you get his patterns down, but the double fight can really bog you down. You'll find yourself avoiding the big guy, and waiting for your time to parry and punish the faster boss. That is, until it gets below 30% HP, and hardly ever leaves the big guy's side. You can end up waiting maybe even 40 seconds at a time for one parryable attack, and if you miss it, you'll end up walking in circles until your opportunity comes again. The fight doesn't really add anything, and feels like it's only there by necessity, and I agree with the complaints of it being a worse version of a fight that the Souls series has already mastered. I've seen a lot of people trying to put this game in its place, saying it's a mix of Dark Messiah, Doom, Dark Souls, even Bulletstorm and Shadow Warrior. But in my opinion, the game stands on its own merits. Sure, it's an easy introduction to the Souls-like genre. It has clear inspiration from Doom, and there's an insta-kill kick mechanic, so it's exactly like Dark Messiah. But to me, the experience from this game feels unique. Maybe the visuals turn people away too quickly. Maybe the previous versions of this game allowed a spam-click approach which turned people off before it was polished. But that's why I made this video. I think this game deserves another chance. Elderborn is a Souls-like that didn't deserve a lot of the hate that it got, being compared to modern classics and standing amongst giants in the Souls category. Elderborn is quite short compared to other titles, but that's always going to be the unavoidable shortfall of making a fast-paced game. Having recently played Severed Steel, which has a fantastic gameplay loop but very short campaign, I can sympathise with Hyperstrange that they were always going to be putting their eggs in one basket, or gameplay mechanics. The game, for me, was a lot of fun and made me want to try out the Souls-like titles and give lesser-known developers a chance to impress me, though this inspiration did lead me to picking up a Disaster, and I'll never forgive it for that. I want more people to try Elderborn, that's why I made this video. The game has come a long way in fleshing out its mechanics and deciding who it wants to be. It's not the same game it was 3 years ago, and I feel like the game has something to offer Souls veterans and new players alike. In any case, it's a step towards looking for something to tide us over while we wait for Elden Ring next year. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing to the Damo Gaming channel to keep up with mine and my colleagues' future releases. Also, liking and commenting really helps our outreach. Thanks again.